Next up, a really important attribute for inputs called name. So when we send data, when we submit a form, like this search form here, that says Silky, that's what I'm searching for, and I hit enter, we've already seen what happens. It submits the form. By the way, there's no button here, but we'll talk about how the submission works in a little bit without that. But when I do submit it, it sends an HTTP request to the form action, which is /search, as we already discussed, and then it sends the data, and it says Q equals Silky. Where is Q coming from? Why does it put Q equals Silky right there? Well, that's coming from the name of the input. If we look at it closely, here's the input. It has, ignore the class and the ID, it's got a placeholder, it says search, although my text is in there, but it has this right here, name equals Q. So that Q is simply a name or a label, although I guess the term label is confusing because we have an actual label too. But this is just a way of referring to the value, whatever is in this input, when the data is sent to the server. So often these are short, they don't have spaces, they're just simple things that your server will look for. In this case, Reddit is looking for something called Q. But they could have been looking for something called query or term or search term or anything else. And then they would change this name. So let me show you how this works on our own inputs. Right now we are submitting to /tacos, which is problematic because it doesn't exist. But if I do add a name to any of these inputs, but let's do the username input, just set name equals, and this can be really anything we want. I usually just go with username if that fits. If that's what this is, why not? Let's do the same thing here. I guess we can just start with username actually. So now if I put something in there like Chicken Man and I submit the form, I don't know if this is going to show up very well in the screencast. I'll paste it over here so you can see it. This is what we submitted, or this is the request that was made. Tacos, okay. And then this question mark thing, username equals Chicken Man. Whatever this is right here, that is the name that will be used to send the data to the server. So think of it as a pair. We've got the name and then a value. Something equals something. So if I change that name to instead be password, which would make no sense, it would be very confusing for some eventual server if we had something expecting a username and a password, and I entered my username, Colt, and I submit, well, it's saying password equals Colt, and it's just going off of that name. So those names are important, and you'll see them all the time on forms if you look at them. For example, if we look at one of these, what do we have here? The Stripe form, if I inspect it, I'm sure there's a name attribute. Geez, a lot of stuff going on, but here's name set to email. And for full name, what do they have? Name equals name. They just call it name instead of full name. Same thing for password. I assume they just call it password. Name equals password. So this attribute is easy to add, but it plays a very, very important role. At the moment, it may not seem that important because we're not doing anything with our form data, but eventually we will be. And this name attribute will be used when our data is sent. It will be labeled under this name. So username, let's do one here. Name equals password. Here we could do name equals color. And name, what is this input supposed to be? I don't know. For a number, name equals, how about just num? Okay, so now if I go back and I submit my form, I'll put something in here. Username is Colt. Password will just be 1234. Color, we'll just go with some reddish color, and a number will be 76. I'm going to submit, and there's quite a lot going on up here. I'm going to copy this, and we really don't need to understand what this is exactly right now, but we've got /tacos, that's coming from the action. Then we have username equals Colt. That was exactly what we had for our name here, and the value was Colt in the input. Then we have this ampersand. This is how the different pairs are connected into one URL. And then we have password equals 1234, color equals, you might be wondering what this is here. Well, technically the color looks like this. This is getting a little bit into the weeds, but it looks something like this where it has a hash symbol or an octothorpe, but instead of that, it's using an encoded version. Let's not even go into it. And then we have num equals 76. Long story short, name is important. You should put it on every single input that you use, and it will be used when you send your data to a server eventually. And the last thing I'll mention is, yes, right now our data is showing up in the URL, which could be problematic, right? We don't want our password to be in the URL. But that's because we're sending what's known as a GET request, and later on we'll see that there's different types of requests, HTTP requests, including a POST request, where that data will not be in the URL, and it will be sent, it's not necessarily in a secret way, but in a less obvious or less visually obvious way, which is a much better approach. So for now, we're not dealing with that, and this just allows us to see all of our data is sent using that name. Okay,